Disclaimer. The hosts of this podcast, Timothy Patrick and Will Foley, are by no means medical professionals. However, having lived experience with mental illness themselves, they have gained useful perspectives on common mental health issues that some of us struggle to overcome on a daily basis. By sharing their stories, they hope to create connection. By creating connection, they hope to help you find your purpose. And through purpose, we can all begin to build the foundation for positive mental health. This is Above Ground Podcast.
Are you ready to lace up your boots, throw up your horns, and jump into the pit? Then let's stomp the stigmas of mental illness. It's time for Above Ground Podcast. Now, Will Foley and Timothy Patrick.
Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome to Above Ground Podcast. Above Ground Podcast because you can't serve below. That's right. Hey, thanks for joining us for another week. Another conversation. This week, we have Ms. Kelly Conrad on with us to discuss complex post-traumatic stress disorder. We'll be getting to that in a minute. But first, I wanted to talk to you about our friends at Close Knit Company. That's right. We have T-shirts and hoodies that Close Knit Company are producing. And Dan and Natalie, big shout out to them down there in Florida. Screen printing. Beautiful stuff, man. Go check it out at their website, closeknitco.com. There's still time to get your little leprechaun hands on some St. Patrick's Day threads. They got some really cool T-shirts. Please, that's how we're keeping the podcast going, is selling some T-shirts. You can donate via PayPal. But I'd much rather have you support small business. And that's what most of the businesses are in the world, are small businesses, 1, 2, 3 people. And that's how we keep it going, man. That's how we keep it going. We pay it forward and we let it rip. So Close Knit Company, we wouldn't be able to do it without them. So please go check them out. Don't forget, they got collections for all kinds of stuff, man. If you're a Jeep lover, if you're a lover of adult beverages, they got some cool, couples teas. They've got collections for Valentine's Day and Christmas. They do collections for all the holidays and stuff. Their Halloween collection is awesome. And their videos are cool, man. Very cool people, Dan and Natalie, and they're helping us out. So we appreciate it very much. So we'd appreciate it very much if you showed it off, man. Wear your T-shirt and take a picture and post it to our Instagram page or post it to our Facebook page, and be awesome. Let's start a conversation about mental health, man, because you know what? It just takes checking in. That's all it is. We are nearing the century mark, and you only get to near the century mark once, man. We're getting close to 100 episodes. I believe this episode is 92, and Tim and I are still trying to figure out what we're doing for episode 100 and beyond, but expect some cool stuff and expect a little change here and there, man, for some stuff, because, you got to keep it fresh. You got to keep it fresh, happening and hopping. So let's get right to it, man. We want to thank everyone for listening. Now it's time for Kelly Conrad. Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome to yet another Above Ground Podcast interview. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another one. Timmy, how we doing this week, buddy? Are you down with TPP?
Yeah, you know me.
Wow, that's better. That's better than past ones, man. That's a little bit more energy.
I tried to put a little bit more emphasis on it this time, just to appease you, really. That was my main goal for the whole.
That's what this whole fucking thing is about, man. Is appeasing me, remember?
Yes, true. How are you doing, Will?
Dude, on the lumen scale, let's see. We decided that the lumen scale was 0 to 100 watts. So yeah. Dude, I'm probably a 60 watt light bulb this week, man. I'm not doing too bad. I got a fresh shave going on.
I see that.
I trimmed up everything on the face, just to make myself presentable on Zoom. Not that we use the video, but eventually we got to start using the video because the video is just going to waste. But yeah, so I'm about 60 on the lumen scale. How about you? How about yourself, my friend?
Yeah, I would say I'm probably around the same. I'm actually, I think I might be a little bit higher because I'm pretty psyched about, we have a new guest this evening on the podcast. So I'm pretty excited to talk with her about, all the goods and all the stories and all the traumas and, all that kind of stuff.
I love it. I love it. So tonight, go
ahead. I was just gonna say, just so it kind of picked me up, a few notches,
I love it. A little bit more brightness to the bulb. So yes, and as Timmy said, tonight we do have a brand new interview. Her name is Kelly Conrad. She is from British Columbia. We seem to hit Canada a lot, man.
I know. I don't know if they listen or we just seek out people and they're like, sure, why not? Maybe they're just really nice over there. I don't know.
It could be. Kelly,
real quick. I was just gonna say really quick, just a quick little. Months ago, I think it was a group or Facebook. It was something on Facebook, like a page, around mental health, and she had commented, and that's what kind of planted the seed for me because she had said something that I was unaware of. So I think I had commented on it, but anyways, we ended up messaging each other back and forth a bit, and I learned quite a bit, and I've been waiting to learn more. So that's kind of how this started. But Kelly, thank you for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really excited to be here and talk about all the things.
I love it. It's awesome. Tonight we're going to talk about something that I had no idea about until recently myself, which is something called complex post-traumatic stress disorder. But a little background on Kelly that I have found is that Kelly is an advocate about complex post-traumatic stress disorder. She is also a lover of Brené Brown. She is also a BeachBody. I want to say, I don't know how quite to put that, but I know you love Shaun T.
Yes. I'm all about Shaun T. He is kind of like my hero, but yeah.
I've listened to I've listened to his podcast a bunch of times just because he's very cool. Is from what I've gathered and stuff. But there was something that and you're a big DBT person. So,
yes. That's where I started.
Maybe that's the group that it was.
I think it was actually. I was trying to remember if it was the DBT group or I'm in a couple of different ones, but EMDR is the therapy that comes up quite often in that group. And every time I see a post about it, I'm always very eager to comment because of my personal experiences with it. I think that it's a very new therapy in terms of therapeutic approaches. Francine Shapiro, it's from the 80s and 90s, which, yes, I realize that was quite a while ago, but in terms of therapy approaches, it's new. So there's not a lot of knowledge about it. There's not actually a heck of a ton of therapists that do it. And I think that there's a lot of chatter around it that's a little, quite frankly, intimidating. It is a very different kind of therapy. It's, most therapy, when you think about therapy, it's like, it's talk, you go into a room and you talk about your feelings and the therapist guides you through a series of questions and sometimes you have epiphanies, sometimes you don't. EMDR is literally the gateway to your nervous system. And the nervous system is the entire focus of what is going on with people who have trauma. You can talk your face off about it. And I'm not saying that it doesn't help, but until you actually get to the root of this issue, which is your nervous system doesn't work properly. And it's not your fault. It's literally that was taken from you at some point, whether it's, with complex PTSD, it's usually when you're a child. But for regular post-traumatic stress disorder, other types of abuse that has happened to people or traumas. If your nervous system can't process that information and appropriately file this memory as a memory in your long-term memory, it gets stored there as muck. And I call it muck because your muck is your trigger. So you're out walking around and you see something, you hear something, you smell something, and for no reason in your head, you're like, I'm on the ceiling. I'm crying. I'm freaking out. I'm pissed. Like, why is this person at the grocery store right now making me so freaking angry? And it really literally is your nervous system is telling you, hi, remember me? Yeah, this thing happened and you didn't deal with it. And I'm going to let you know in all these different ways. And I'm actually going to scream at you until you listen. So whether it's that I give you gastrointestinal issues, I'm just going to go there. Whether I give you vertigo or I give you panic attacks or I give you rage issues, until you listen to me, I'm here. And that is what I try to tell people about EMDR, is that this therapy actually gets those files, processes them, and puts them in a place where they need to be, which is not in your, oh my God, I want to be triggered for the rest of my life. And that's what EMDR has done for me. It's changed my entire life.
Wow.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That was a whole lot. That was a whole lot right there. The thing is, I didn't have much experience with DBT until Tim and I had gotten together with this. I came from that therapy of the CBT thing, but we actually did, in 2019, if you go back in our episodes from September 4th through October 16th of 2019, if you go back to our episodes that long ago, we actually did an entire section about DBT, and we covered all of it. We covered distress tolerance, emotional
regulation,
interpersonal effectiveness. We covered mindfulness. We covered the whole scope of it. So if anybody out there is listening, you can go back to those episodes. They're all still available. Yeah. But I don't have much experience with EMDR. I do know about it. Yeah. But I've never experienced it myself. And I'm really curious to let you just kind of tell us how you got to this, where you came from. Like, obviously there's something that's majorly happened in your life that has caused you a lot of pain. I read some of your blog posts on your WordPress site, and I'm really curious to know, first of all, how are you now?
I mean, for real, I am, and I don't say this lightly, I am amazing. I'm the most fulfilled, happy version of Kelly Conrad I have been in my 38 years of life. I am grounded. I am grateful. I'm living a totally free, purposeful life. I have inner peace. I don't have the triggers in my life that, for years and years and years before I knew what I had, I just felt like I was floundering. Like, I was like, I'm anxious and I try to control things and I'm angry and I'm depressed and I didn't really know what to do with any of this stuff. And it wasn't until my whole world got turned upside down that it was like somebody came, and I said at the beginning, I'll talk a lot about the universe. I have a whole thing about the universe. So it's like the universe came and dumped a big, huge garbage bin that is my life all over the floor and said, for real, like, we're talking every stupid, crappy thing that's ever happened. And it was like, okay, now you're going to clean this up. You are going to pick up each piece of trash. You are going to look at it. You are going to acknowledge it. You are going to recognize that it happened. You're going to sort through it, and you are going to heal from it. You are going to stop pretending it didn't happen. You're going to stop trying to be strong. You're going to do the work, and it's going to be horrible, and you're going to hate some of it, and you're probably going to wonder if you're ever going to get to the other side. I got to the other side.
Wow. Congratulations.
Congrats.
Yeah. So
now can I just interrupt, and I don't want to skip some of your story, but do you think that EMDR was one of the main variables in getting through to the other side?
Absolutely. I will say, so it's interesting you guys talked about DBT, and it's something that I actually like heavily advocate for in our Facebook group. You cannot, and again, I'm not a therapist, I'm not an expert. This is just my personal experience, and also just having the therapist I have. It is detrimental that you have the DBT skills background before you do EMDR, specifically around distress tolerance, mindfulness, and understanding how to identify emotions and regulating yourself, because this therapy, it sends you to the moon. Like, I will not even sugarcoat it. There have been moments that I have done this therapy where I have come close to vomiting. I have almost passed out. I have had blackout experiences. I've had to pull myself out of dissociative episodes, which I couldn't do pre-EMDR, and now I'm able to do that. Yeah, it's heavy duty, and I'm not even gonna pretend.
I've heard that it is heavy duty. Some people say this, that I've talked with, because I was interested in doing it, so I was researching it for a while. And anytime someone would talk about it in a group or some kind of post, I would encourage the conversation and try and get more out of it, so I could understand a little bit more what it entailed.
Yeah,
I have to ask you, what happened to you that led to all this garbage that you needed, all this trash that you needed to pick up? Because I think that's an important. I get that after you said 38 years of everything. I'm just wondering, like, what traumatic things have happened, and I would assume that they've probably been pretty bad.
No, and that's an excellent question. So it's kind of a two-pronged thing. So obviously, having complex PTSD, I've had multiple traumas since I was a child, and I just kind of held on here and here and here. But in 2017, I had been married. I got married in July. 3 weeks before our wedding, I suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. I was just in the kitchen. I was flailing 100 miles a minute, and I cracked my head open on the edge of the kitchen cupboard. I just made perfect contact, knocked myself unconscious, and ended up with like a severe TBI, which would turn out contributed to the emotional dysregulation. So I was already extremely emotionally dysregulated and didn't really know. So this kind of sent me to the moon, if you will. So we struggled through that. I obviously struggled through that, had to work really hard at it. But in 2018, my now ex-husband, we were violently attacked downtown one night when we were out for a bachelorette party by security staff at a hotel. There was a police file report. It was very serious. We ended up in the hospital in the emergency room.
Wow.
More of the heat than I did. And he's had his own trauma issues. So his approach was, I just want to pretend this didn't happen. Which, it was like this for the two of us, because I was like, we need to deal with this. And he was like, I don't want to deal with this. So we sort of slowly started to do this as a couple. Shortly after that happened, we went through the loss of a baby, a pregnancy. So after that happened, I was completely derailed. I was very, very sick. I was dissociative. I was, for the sake of this interview, I was cutting. I was really, really, really bad. And I remember that my mantra was, and it was in September of 2018, I woke up one day and I said, I need to fix my life. And I don't really even know what that means, but I need to fix my life. And my mantra was, I am going to become the mother that my child would deserve. And I don't even really know what that means, but I'm going to figure it out. And so off I went on my transformation journey, and that's my Shaun stuff and my Brené Brown. I started reading her books, and I was like, oh my God, this didn't start with me. Like, there's family abuse, and there's, there's trauma from childhood, and this is not Kelly's just anxious. Like, there's something going on here. And so I started, I lost 30 pounds in that process. I started doing Brené Brown's work. I started doing her workbooks, and I said, I want to go see a therapist. And I started the DBT process, not even really knowing what I was doing. And in 2019, the stuff just didn't stop. My husband and our car got totaled. He lost his grandfather. It was just thing after thing after thing after thing. And eventually starting kind of in April, he started to really drift. And I started having dreams, which now I know is my nervous system going, ha ha ha, this is familiar. You're going to be abandoned. We'll talk about that later. And long story short, he left the marriage. And I was done. That was my bottom. I had never trusted anyone in my life, ever. And he was the one person that I trusted with my entire being. And he hurt me pretty badly. He betrayed me pretty badly. I completely unraveled. My family was like, oh my God, this is really serious. And it was the most important thing that's ever happened to me. If my husband had not done what he did to me, and I seriously mean this, I would not be sitting here right now. It forced me to accept that this needed to be fixed. And so off I went, and I got the DBT going, and I finally was able to get a diagnosis because I was so sick, because I was in and out of the psych emerge, like they were taking me into the psych emergency because I was dissociative and wandering around in Victoria and not knowing who I was. Like, it was terrifying for me. It was terrifying for my family. And I remember I went into the psych emerge and I said, I just want help. Like, I don't care what I have to do. I don't care what therapy I have to take. I don't care if I have to be admitted. Like, I just want to fix my life. And the scary thing about that, the psych emerge experience, is they basically said, and this is one of the things I want to advocate for so hard, is, well, this is going to be really tough, Kel, because you come in here, you're dissociative, but you're respectful, you're not throwing things and yelling and screaming. And so we're going to discharge you because you didn't come here on crack. You didn't commit a crime. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. So not that I'm, dismissing or belittling people who have addiction issues or rage issues. That's not what I'm saying. But you're telling me that I have to come in here and hurt people to get help? Oh.
It's funny because I can actually relate to a lot of what you're talking about. And, but that incident for sure, and at the time it was probably okay for me because I didn't really, but I actually ended up checking myself into a hospital, and in similar situation, they were like, well, you don't really want to stay here. Like, this isn't really the place for you. Like, you should be okay. And I was like, and I didn't want to be there, but I drove myself there because I knew that I shouldn't be in my house alone. Right. You know what I mean? So, but at the same time, I was like, I don't really want to be here, but I don't know what I need. That's why I reached out, because I had no idea. Exactly. So, but long story short, yeah, I can totally get that, because like I said, at the time I didn't think anything of it. And then I told my story a few times to people, and they were like, they just let you leave? And I'm like, yeah. And then I started to think about it, and the more that I learn and get involved in this, it's like, yeah, that was a little weird.
Yep. Yeah. No, they were very just, you're not kicking and screaming. And I do want to take a second just to give some kudos. I did write a letter, but the Victoria Police Department did they were amazing. They had to come to my aid. There were a couple of house checks that were done in 2019, and they
Very
were
cool.
so respectful. They were so kind, and I really could not have got through some of what I got through without their assistance. So kudos to their team. But yeah, I was like, what am I supposed to do? You know, they're not going to help me. I'm not sick enough. I'm not standing on top of a building. And, you know, to the universe, because here I was after this last visit, they wouldn't give me the psychiatric evaluation. And I said, universe, like, I am prepared to do whatever it takes. Like, please help me. And so we were, I was with one of my co-workers at the hospital who works with the union, and she and I went, had been released from the emergency, and she said, okay, we're going to go to the clinic and we're going to get a doctor to fill out these forms so that you can actually get a psychiatric assessment and we can find out what's going on and we can start, you know, getting you fixed, right? So we go to the clinic because in British Columbia, there's a huge primary care physician shortage. So a lot of us have to use like the walk-in clinics. You guys as Americans, it's like, okay, Canada has all this healthcare, but it's pretty tricky. Like you have to go and sit and wait for like 3 or 4 hours just to see a doctor. So, and it was the strangest thing because sometimes you get a really good doctor and sometimes you get kind of not such a great doctor. And this particular doctor walked into the room. My coworker started telling her a little bit about my story. And I looked at her, she looked at me and she said, oh my God, I remember you. You're the girl that cracked your head open on the kitchen cabinet a few years ago. And wow. I saw you the morning after your concussion. She said, I remember I was so worried about you. She said it was a severe hit to the head. And she's like, this is crazy. And she basically took one look at me and said, I will be your doctor. I'm not supposed to do this. I can't take you on as a primary patient. But she said, I will be your doctor. I will fill out your forms. She said, this is madness. Like the fact that you had to come in here, you were released from psych emerge and basically told you're not being a lunatic, for a better lack of term. We won't help you. She's like, this is what's wrong with the world. She's like, they should help anyone, especially someone who's brave enough to come forward and say, I am not okay up here. Like somebody please pay attention. If you went into the ER with a abdominal pain, they'd be like, oh God, well, heaven forbid now.
Well, yeah, because they can fix that. They can fix that. They can do something with that. They can't do something upstairs all the time. I don't want to cut you off. I have to ask this because I have not heard anything about you saying that you were suicidal at any point.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know, were you suicidal at some point, or was that not something that had? So here was the issue, and this, when I got the diagnosis, this was probably the most important part of my diagnosis, which I'm going to talk about more in my blog post, was this dissociation. So dissociation is a nervous system safety tactic, essentially, that people who've gone through trauma experience. It's part of the 4 F's, and it is a freeze response where you basically you check out. You are sure. I've heard about that with people who suffer like sexual abuse, where their mind goes to another place during the abuse, and they don't realize they kind of like rise above their bodies. Kind of.
Exactly.
Not to minimize it, but that's the way, the simplest way that I can explain it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for some people, it's very short-lived. So it's like you'll get triggered by something and you kind of just check out. You can see it with people where they get sort of a glazed over look, and it's like, are you here right now? And they kind of just don't even answer. It can be more severe, which was what was my situation. The most severe kind is if you actually have like dissociative disorder. So that's kind of more like your split personality. Yeah. And I was broaching on that. That was one of the things that I was personally quite scared of. So when this happened with my husband, I was so emotionally dysregulated. Like I had no window of tolerance. I had no grounding. I had nothing. I was on the ceiling or I was checked out. So I would get triggered by something and I would dissociate, and I would basically go wandering in the dark. This is why the Victoria Police had to come and find me. And I would have no memory of having left my house. I would revert to basically like a 7-year-old is kind of where we figured out in therapy I would go. And so one of the last times that I got picked up, and I, they were asking me like, you know where you are? And I said, no. And they said, can you tell us where, can you read license plates? Okay. Like I'm a 38-year-old woman. And I said to the policeman, what's a license plate? Like wow. A 7-year-old wouldn't really know that. So that was their first clue. Like, oh, this woman is not here. So because I had a memory of those things, the self-harm was that was when the self-harming happened, and I would have no recollection. So,
Kelly, I need to ask because I don't know this. Now you said that it goes like for you at least it went. It took you back to like 7 years old or around that time frame. Is that like an indication of when you were like safe, or was that an indication of the time of trauma?
It's two. So I learned in my EMDR that it's two things. So 7-year-old me was the most significant traumatic experience that occurred where the process started, if you will. So that was where my nervous system became damaged to a point that it was not corrected. And my attachment, so you guys have heard of secure attachment, obviously, with like, kids need secure attachment.
Yeah, I know all about it.
Right. So I had no secure attachment with my caregivers. And when this traumatic experience happened, and I, as a child, looked for the safety and I looked for the resolve, it was gone. So my nervous system basically reverts back to that age because what happened to me being abandoned by my husband was a parallel for my nervous system as being abandoned as a child in that traumatic experience.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
That makes sense. That actually makes a lot of sense.
Yep. Makes perfect sense for sure.
Yeah. So, but yes, suicide was, it was nothing that I ever actively woke up in the morning and thought to do. As weird as that sounds, I know some people wake up and they're depressed and think, I just don't want to be here. But for me, it was, I would be in so much pain that I would check out to the point that I had no memory. And so from a medical standpoint, pretty scary. So
I got to ask you, so was that the only TBI that you've ever suffered, or did you have other issues growing up? Did you play sports? Was there any other things that went on? Because during the past conversation, we've talked about CTE on this podcast, which is the brain disease that happens to a lot of football players and soccer players and UFC fighters and type of thing, which is this literal deterioration of the brain from just traumatic injury over and over again.
Yeah. No, this was not my first TBI. I've had other minor, I think I'm trying to remember. I've had 3, minor concussions, but this particular concussion, having had previous ones and where I got hit, like that's the whole thing about brain injuries is where you get hit really matters. Like if I get hit with a ball in the front of my skull, nothing's going to happen because I'm protected. But once you get into any of this soft tissue, so the very top of your head and this back part, really dangerous.
Because your brain moves forward in the liquid that it's in, and it constantly goes off the front of your head. And
exactly. Yeah.
I figured it had to have been pretty bad. It made an impression on that doctor where she remembered. So,
Oh yeah. Well, considering like so after it happened, my girlfriend, so because I'd had concussions before, I knew you can't go to sleep thing. So I stayed up, as much as I could in the night. And in the morning, we'd made a decision. She said, okay, we got to take you to the doctor. And she said she knew it was really bad, both her and the doctor, because she literally said to me, hey, Kel, I'm going to just go downstairs and move my car. And so she was gone for, 2 or 3 minutes tops. And she came back upstairs and she came in the door and I said, "Oh, when did you get here?" And she said she just went, "Oh my God." Like that's Kelly's memory is like I have a memory that is just insane. And so for her, that as for my friend, she said that was really concerning. And I had huge issues with memory. I had terrible emotional regulation issues. And then I had a lot of vestibular issues. So I had the terrible vertigo, where I would just be kind of lying down in bed and I would wake up and it was like the whole room was spinning. I would get sick. It was an awful way to live. It was awful. So
can you touch on some of the factors that separates the CPTSD from the PTSD, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So regular PTSD basically is a one-time event, and it can be extremely severe. Like it's not to be minimized by any means, but essentially how it works, and this is how I understand it to work, is when something happens that's startling. So our nervous system, we're cued for like, oh shoot, get out of the way, like a bus is coming. So if you have something happen to you that's horrifying, and you're able to actually, like your cortex, which I call it your front door. You'll hear me say front door, back door. Back door is my nervous system. Front door is my cortex. So your cortex can take that information, process it, let your nervous system regulate, like, oh, okay, you're safe. We're good. Store it in a memory file. And then, when you think about, oh man, do you remember what that time we were downtown and that bus almost hit us? Oh crap, that was crazy, man. But you can just kind of talk about it. It's not a big deal. Your PTSD is this thing was so horrific that your brain couldn't process this information and it gets trapped in your nervous system. It's not filed. It doesn't know what it's doing. And so then you start thinking about that thing. You're like, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to think about that. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I want to run away. That's your PTSD. Complex PTSD typically starts in childhood, and it is repetitive trauma back to back to back with no chance of escape. So they literally refer to it as like a war zone, which some people think like, oh, that's pretty dramatic, like a kid in a war zone. Like, do they actually even know what that means? Well, here's the problem with that. A child's brain, the cortex, is not actually developed properly. I can't remember what age it happens. It's like 12 or something like that. So if you're exposed to these traumatic events and you don't have the brain, nor do you have the life experience to understand this is really serious and this isn't. So you go to your caregiver and are like, hey, this thing happened to me. Like, should I be freaked out by this? If you don't have that like caregiver to say, you're safe, you're okay, I love you, everything's going to be fine, you start to have pretty screwed up core beliefs about who you are as a person and the way you are in the world. Because it's like, oh, well, this bad thing happened to me and this bad thing happened to me. There must be something wrong with me. I'm defective. And that is your complex post-traumatic stress, because it's not just about the actual traumatic event. It's about the impact on your nervous system and your core beliefs about who you are as a human being.
Wow. Now what happens to someone who has caregivers who are also maybe not available all the time? Maybe they are sometimes, and they'll tell you one thing, like I'm like children of alcoholics.
Yes.
Because I grew up in an alcoholic environment.
Right.
And it depended on what day it was, how good it was, or how bad it was sometimes. Now, I was never physically abused, but there was definitely a lot of issues that were caused by all this. And there was a lot of self-doubt that was instilled, even though it necessarily may not have been, because it was just so from one pole to the other all the time. What happens to somebody who experiences things like that, as far as because if you can rely on your caregiver sometimes, but you can't rely on them all the time, what is that like? How have you learned? Have you learned anything about that?
Yeah, so it's interesting, because I think so when we're dealing with trauma, specifically, there's kind of like the four, like I call it the four main groups. So there's your complex PTSD, there's your bipolar, there's your borderline, and your narcissistic personality. And so some children can be exposed to specific levels of dysfunction or abuse or whatever you want to call it. And for whatever reason, they come out, kind of like, hey, I'm pretty normal. Like, I don't have some of the issues that this person has, because people have asked me, like, hey, how come you both, your brother and you came from the same family and you ended up this way, but he ended up another way. And so the long, short answer is kind of, it really, I think, does depend on biology to an extent. I think that we are wired a certain way. That isn't to say like, well, you're just not resilient enough. That's not what I'm saying. But you're going to inherit specific genetics from your parents. And I do believe that some of us are just, some of us are wired to be a little bit more anxious. Some of us are wired to be a little more quiet. Some of us are wired to be introverted. I don't think that that's from traumatic experience necessarily. I think it can shape you. But with the 4 that I just listed, there's very specific criteria, as I learned, as to how you end up with one of those 4, because I was kind of like, how the heck did I end up over here with this one that's curable, and I didn't end up with borderline, and I didn't end up with this? Well, if you as a child are able to, in your dysfunctional relationship with your parents, so for you just mentioned alcoholism, right? So alcoholism, we're talking addiction. It means this person has their own trauma that they are, they don't have that resolved. They have crappy core beliefs. And so they're projecting that onto you as a child. If you as the child are able to connect with your parent, even if it is with trauma bonding, so you fawn all over your parent, you smooth your environment to like make things happy for them. And then it's like, oh, you're such a good little girl because you went and got dad's beer and now I'm very happy for you, which is like very screwed up and dysfunctional. But you've attached with your parent through a traumatic bonding experience. So you're now
right. That's codependency right there.
Codependency. There you go. So if you can do that, you will end up with this more likely complex PTSD, or, you can get into the borderline. So that's where I ended up on the spectrum, because I was able to connect with one of my parents. If you cannot connect with that parent, if you are rejected by that parent, if that parent doesn't love you, no matter what you do, you end up on your narcissistic end of the spectrum, because you were unable to secure an attachment with that parent, even if it's through trauma bonding. So you guys, if you've done any work around narcissistic stuff, you've maybe heard of like narcissistic injury. So narcissistic injury is literally the moment when the child tries to connect with the caregiver and they cannot do it. And that bond, it's ripped, it's broken, and they cannot experience like emotions and feelings because it's too painful for them. So that's where you're narcissistic people, where it's like, I have no empathy, I don't care. And the empaths, like I'm the empath over here going, how can you not care about people? Like, I'm obsessed with people. I'm like constantly worried about what people think of me. And it's like, for them, their way of coping with their pain is literally it's like a division of their body. Like, here's me over here as a kid when I cared. Here's me with no emotions and no empathy to protect myself. So
that's interesting. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but most people hear narcissist or narcissistic behavior, and
right.
It's not something that you should, I guess, be compassionate about in a way, And I feel like after that explanation that you gave, there is some, compassion maybe to be had
it depends
point. At a certain point. Yeah.
At the surface level, to have compassion for anybody is important. But there's also a rationale that goes to say, you know what, you're a fucking adult. And you may have this issue that you haven't resolved, but guess what? At a certain age, it's up to you, just like Kelly or just like any of us, it's up to you to do the fucking work. And
I agree.
And if you choose not to do the work, well, guess what? That's on you. So that narcissistic thing, I totally understand it. And there's some compassion there to be had. But I think that narcissism has a whole other level to it that is very I don't even know what word to call it, but there's some certain aggressive part to that narcissism that says it doesn't matter what anybody does for me. I'm going to do what I want because I'm the one who knows it all.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think at a certain point you can have empathy. And I think we should feel some empathy towards everyone because that's just how we should be as humans.
I just meant in general, like sometimes we feel more empathy for someone who has, a depression or anxiety, and it just that for me, maybe it's just me. It seems like it's way lower on the scale. Like, for me,
I definitely see where you're coming from though. And I definitely think that we have less empathy for people that we view in that narcissistic part of the quartet, as I'll call it, because that's quite the quartet. It's amazing that four things are like makes up quite the band. Like that's the Beatles of fucking mental illness right there.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, and I mean, so okay, on the narcissistic front, and it's interesting because, and I should say this for the record. So obviously, I think it kind of goes without saying, I was subjected to a tremendous amount of narcissistic abuse as a child. So I was gaslit. I was, my reality was questioned constantly. I was, punished for showing emotions because I was always a very bright and independent and, like I've got a lot of strengths to me. I've got a lot of gut to me. And
you seem like you were a free thinker.
Yeah, I was. And so I would get, I was that kid that would ask the teacher why. Like, well, why do we have to do this way? It was not because I was being a pain in the ass. It was literally like, I just really actually just want you to explain to me why we're doing it this way.
Well, curiosity gets beat out of us as a child, no matter who does it.
Exactly. So I was punished for a lot of my explorations, feelings, emotions. And as a result, I ended up, with this train of, because that's the problem is if you as a kid are exposed to narcissistic abuse and alcoholism, I was exposed to that as well, that comes into play. You will typically pick unhealthy relationships going forward in your life because it's familiar to you.
It's familiar. Yep. It's comforting. Sure.
And you honestly don't have the core belief self-worth that you are worthy of being loved because you were told it basically crap. So on the narcissistic thing, I'm totally with you. Well, like you have to be an adult. There's a guy that I follow. He's a therapist. His name is Ross Rosenberg. He's brilliant. He wrote a book called The Human Magnet Syndrome. All of his work is around narcissistic personality disorder, and he really wants codependency to be changed to be called self-love deficit because he said
I love it. I got to find that book because that's like it's amazing what self-love or lack of self-love really does to you as a human being, especially the older you get, and especially as you grow as an adult, and whether we grow really or if we're just stuck in our 7 or 5-year-old or 9-year-old, whatever body we're trapped in.
Yeah. But his work really allowed me to educate myself further on this personality disorder. And not so much that I could, I didn't want it to come from a place of blaming because I thought, what's happened to me has happened to me and it's my responsibility to fix it. But I feel like for me to actually heal, I needed to understand what I was dealing with respect to that disorder so that I could have the empathy to understand that, yes, this person did this to me and it was their fault. However, they were a traumatized person who doesn't have the skills or tools to understand what impact they're having on me as a child. So I learned from Ross that narcissistic personality disorder is the hardest one to treat on the spectrum because that part of their core beliefs, if you will, is I didn't do it. It's not my fault. And
that's kind of what I was trying to say earlier. It's like, I feel, believe me, like you were saying, you agree with, well, I agree. I'm not saying I don't, but I agree that across the line, Like, I'm not going to look at narcissistic behavior, and I'm not going to look at depression and go, oh, I feel bad for this guy who's depressed. He needs to give him more leniency. No. You're an adult, even if you're depressed. You're an adult, even if you have all mental illness. It's your responsibility, and that's why I love this conversation, because of the trauma that you have had. So many people that I have been, encountered will take the victim role and be like, oh, this happened to me and this happened to me. And that's why I'm stuck. And it's like, well, that's maybe why you're stuck. But the reason why you're sitting stuck is because of you. That got you to that point. But now it's your job to get out of it.
Exactly. And that's actually a good segue of like the others, like, because I know you guys want to do like, well, what the hell did you do? Right. So yes, the EMDR was one component of it, but it was so many other things. And it really, I really need people to understand that this was 360 degrees of work. It was not just going in and doing the EMDR and processing these horrible memories. Like I've had to work at this every single day for, almost 2 years. And the biggest thing that I take away every day is gratitude. I cannot express to anybody enough about the power of gratitude and what it has meant for me to transform my life in ways that I never imagined possible. I
got to ask you a question about that while you're talking about gratitude, because I have the brand new issue of Psychology Today sitting over on my shelf, and they're actually talking about how faking gratitude can actually do a negative part of it, where I totally understand and 100% agree with gratitude. Absolutely.
Yep.
Being grateful for the bad things, the good things. You have to be grateful for everything you get, because they've all taught you something. They've all given you something. But did you experience that part where you had to fake yourself through gratitude at the beginning of this?
No. So it's really, really, really good and important that you brought that up, because I think sometimes when people hear me talk about gratitude, right, it's like, oh God, here we go, Pollyanna, gonna tell us a freaking story about how she changed the world and the sky is blue and, come on, whatever. And here's what I have to say about that is that gratitude is something for me where I really go through my day realizing there's always going to be somebody that's going to have more than me, and there's always going to be somebody that's going to have less. And you need to focus on what you have, but you also need to allow yourself to grieve and go through loss and anger. Like, it is okay for people to get angry. It is okay for people to grieve something that they've lost or something that they've been through. And I'm a huge advocate for, okay, whoa, wait, this really bad thing happened to you. Let's acknowledge it. Let's validate it. I'm going to validate your experience. This happened to you. How did it make you feel? Like, this is real for you. You feel these feelings. This is real. Like, you're not a baby. You're not strong. Like, let's deal with this.
And I think suppressing those feelings and emotions are part of the problem.
Exactly. So it's like, let's acknowledge that this happened. How do we feel about this? Where do we feel it? And you guys knowing DBT know about the importance of like identifying the emotion and where do you feel it in your body and being able to do that so that you can regulate. But then
absolutely, and it's never always the first emotion. It's usually a second. Like, the first emotion is just the opening, and then we've learned. Tim and I have learned this on our own. I know we've also learned from the conversations that we've had that it's never the first emotion. You may feel anger, but what's really the emotion that's really going on? Is it loss? Exactly. Is it abandonment? Is it like there's other things that bring up those emotions that we don't always look at, because we always look at the surface things. We're always ready to look at the first thing that we find. Oh, I'm pissed off because, I stubbed my toe. But are you really pissed off because you stubbed your toe? Or are you really hurt because, somebody forgot to pick you up? And it's just like it's crazy how that works.
Yep, exactly. And that's the thing. So it's like, you have to validate what's going on, and you have to allow yourself to sit with it and process it. But then, it's like, okay, like, do you want to fix this or not? And so that's the difference between just being a Pollyanna about it, right? Like, oh, just smile through the sunshine and there's never any worries. I'm here to tell you, like, life is freaking tough, man. Like, I've been through hell on earth and come to see the other side of it. But the gratitude for me, really, and like I said, like I've got a little story on my webpage, but I will never forget the day that I started all of this, because it was June. I hated, like, I was dissociative. Like, think about it. Like, the police were coming to my house. Like, I didn't know who I was. I was living with my mother. You know, here I am, 38 years old, and I'm living with my mother because I can't be left by myself. You know, I was taken off of work, and oh my God, poor me. And I remember I was out. It was a cloudy day. I was so angry. I was at the bridge there's this bridge that connects downtown and Songhees and Victoria, and the stupid bridge went up, and I was, oh my God, like, I was fuming. I was like, oh my God, this is going to ruin my entire day, everything. And I just want to jump off this bridge. And like, I'm not even kidding. Like, I hated the world. I hated me. I didn't want to be there. I just wanted it to end. And I looked into the sky, and sorry, this is very emotional for me because it was a really big moment. I looked into the sky and I said, God damn it, Kelly, find something to be grateful for. Find something to make your life worth living, because this is not what you want to be doing. And I kid you not, in that moment, it was like the sun sort of just popped through the clouds, and I kind of noticed it and sat with it. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. How does that make me feel? And the first thing that popped into my head was my aunt. My aunt has multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's. She's bedridden. She's actually in the hospital right now. Her life is pretty small. And I thought about what her life is, and that she doesn't have the opportunity to stand at that bridge and be pissed off. She doesn't have the opportunity to be annoyed that she can't walk across the bridge because she doesn't have legs that work. And I kid you not, in that moment, I thought about her. I sat with it in my body. And the next thing I did, I turned around, the bridge was going down, and I see this dude, and I'm like, oh, this guy, get out of my way. You know, get out of here. You're pissing me off. And I look, he's in a wheelchair and he doesn't have legs. And I thought, and there it is. Like, there it is, Kelly. You have a life to live. You have a working body. You have your health. You have so much more life to live. Do not let this ruin you. Like, let's fix this. And that was kind of the big start to me wanting to get to the other side. And so I do really advocate for gratitude. This acknowledgement that bad things happen, and we need to sit with those things and acknowledge those things. We don't want to Pollyanna our way through it. It drives me crazy when people are like, oh yeah, you had a bad day? Well, guess what? My day was so much worse. And it's like, okay, cool. We're comparing shitty experiences.
It's ridiculous. I see it so much in this mental health community that it literally makes me vomit. It literally just, I'm like, I don't get it. Like, why are we competing for the negative Olympics here? Like, you get a trophy for having like the worst day. Yep. Like, is that, if that's what you want, go right ahead. Because I don't want to be in those Olympics. I don't want to be in it. No, I want to hear stories like Kelly's that, you know, she found out all this stuff and gathered her evidence and like said, I've had enough. And like, I'm going to do something about it. Like, that's what I want to hear. You know, and then I want to hear how you did it and what brought you to that point. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why you can think of 10 million things to be negative about, you know what I mean? And that's all you're going to do is continue down that path. You know, but if you can start saying, hey, let me start thinking positive and being thankful for things, then you're going to start looking for the positive. And then that it will hopefully, you know, in turn be your future.
And the positive, I really have to swear by this, like, because you start advocating for the positive things, it actually shifts your way of thinking. It shifts.
Oh, for sure.
It's like a muscle, right? Like, it's like, oh, I want a bicep. Well, you got to start practice, you know, you got to start lifting the weight to build the muscle. This is its own muscle. And the people who are going through that negative, you know, woe is me, and like my trauma is worse than yours, that really boils down to they have terrible self-worth issues. They have horrible core beliefs about who they are as a person. And when you are waking up in the morning and this is your Brené Brown, and you can't lean into that discomfort because your belief is, I am a worthless piece of crap. I'm not worthy of love and belonging. I'm defective. There's something wrong with me. When you carry that weight around with you, it's going to show up. Maybe it's going to show up in busyness, maybe it's going to show up in anger. Maybe it's going to show up in, I need to compete in the negative Olympics because I just need somebody to validate that
right. And I
is real.
I agree with you 110%. And it's great because it's like you're kind of validating some of the things that I've always thought. So it's really nice to hear, I guess, that somebody else.
Yeah, I think I have some examples of how it shows up too.
Yeah.
You know what I do? I want to throw in two things. Both from earlier in the conversation, we were talking about, I think when it was around like the 4 F's and like, why did this happen to you and maybe not your brother or and I think it's the same thing with just mental illness in general is I think, we're all wired a certain way and, maybe this person is more susceptible than this person. And if that person that's more susceptible goes down a different path, then they're going to start checking all those boxes. And then once those boxes are checked, I think that's when that question of why, that's when that answer should pop up.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. And like I say, because sometimes people will say like, oh, and I think that there's some shame there too, right? For people of
for sure.
How come I ended up I remember when I got diagnosed and told people what I had and, oh my God, it wasn't funny, but so many people were like, oh my God, is that just really, really bad PTSD? You must be so devastated. That means you have a mental illness. And oh no, it was just I was actually shocked at some of the responses that I got from people that I kind of felt like I could, put my trust in. And, at the time, because I had terrible core beliefs, it shone that light of, oh no, you see, Kelly, they now know what you have. It really does mean that you are defective and you are not, it was just so counterproductive. And then I started realizing, no. This shows how little education there is.
That's exactly
all of these topics. People have no clue what we're dealing with here. They just hear these words and they go, oh God, narcissist, oh Jesus.
Right. And that's one of the reasons that started this whole thing connection with you is, I didn't know what CPTSD was and you explained it. And I'm like, people need to hear this. We need to get this out here because you don't hear of it as often as you would hear of anxiety, so it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but either way, it should be, someone should be talking more about this. And we should get it out to people and let them know.
Yeah. And complex PTSD is new too on the DSM. So it's a newer diagnosis. And it is actually one that was very frequently misdiagnosed for borderline personality disorder.
Right.
Because there are so many shades where they blend together very beautifully. But from what I understand, the biggest difference between complex PTSD and the borderline is specifically around the abandonment issue. So borderline personality folk, they have the utmost level of threat with respect to abandonment because they were abandoned by their caregivers in a very traumatic way. And so the way their brains work, just as a basic example, a person with borderline, if you set up a lunch date, for example, or, we set up this podcast and let's say one of you bails. Okay. You send me a message and you say, oh gosh, Kel, we can't do it. Tim's sick today or whatever. The complex PTSD person might go, oh no, I hope that doesn't mean that he doesn't like me anymore. You'd have some self-love questions. The borderline person goes, they take that as the utmost total threat that you've abandoned them, and it's the biggest trigger, and they can go to the moon. And so you borderline people would, they'd say, oh my God, like you abandoned me on this call and you canceled it and it was so disrespectful. And like, I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And the person on the receiving end would be like, dude, like I was sick. Like I just didn't think I could do the podcast. But for them, it is a real life threat that this decision for you to not show up means that you're going to abandon them because there's something wrong with them. It's heavy duty. So I'm always like, think about living that way. It would be very difficult.
Yeah, every single thing would be a trigger. It's like that.
Yeah.
The whole world is full of landmines if you live like that.
Yep.
Although I will say this though, with that description, I've never quite heard it put that way. So I could honestly see where there's so much gray that these diagnoses, we'll call them, because that's what they are. I mean, the DSM is full of information and it's full of diagnosis because they've also got to give names to everything. But it's like, I can see where you could have a misdiagnosis because
Absolutely.
so many things there's so many things that relate to depression that are in this box. And then you got this box and you got this square over here. And it's just like,
yeah,
that's why.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's why I Will and I have talked about this numerous times, and I just view it this way now. Is I just view mental illness as a spectrum.
Yes.
And depending on where you are, if you're closer to the illness side or you're closer to the wellness side, and I just believe that because anybody could, like Will was saying, you could go on to the DS or whatever, read about BPD and be like, oh yeah, this is me totally. And I could go on there and read it and I'm like, totally me. Absolutely. But then I could go on and read something else and be like, yeah, that's me too. So it's, you know what I mean? It's like,
and not to cut you off, but because I wanted to kind of second what you just said, while she was describing BPD and stuff, I'm hearing some of these things and I'm like, shit, I've had those thoughts. I'm like, well, shit, if somebody says I can't show up, well, fuck, man, I must be done something wrong. It must be my fault. It must be. Oh, yeah. Because it's always comes down to that. It's always my fault kind of thing where you always feel like the weight of the world is like you caused the whole thing to blow up.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting you were talking about boxes because my mom, my mom's going to listen to this. Yes, mother, I brought you into this. She doesn't like the labels. She's really against labels. So she doesn't like the boxes. And so
I like your mom already.
Yeah. I was really focused, and I'll be honest about this. Like I was very focused on boxes. And at the time, I'd say to her like, Mom, this is just what I need to do right now. And at that time I wasn't sure why. And now I understand that when I first found out about my actual quote unquote box, it was a moment of validation that I'd never received as a human being. That in fact, yes, here is a list of things that I fall under that explains and validates what's quote unquote wrong with me. Right. So, but what actually was the bigger issue? And that's where, we can get into I have complex or I have narcissistic personality or whatever, or I have anxiety. All of these mental health issues have something super important in common. And that's the part that I realized was the connection between why I needed that validation. We do not have good core beliefs. We all have a message of
Will and I are like,
love.
yeah.
I am not lovable. I am not worthy. I am defective. I'm to this. I'm to that. I'm all these things. And so once I actually started to understand that I needed that diagnosis for the time being to validate that it was okay that I was a little neurotic. It was okay that I was a dissociative disaster. It was okay that I was all these things because my nervous system was sick and trying to tell me, can you please fix me? Like, can you please take me to the EMDR doctor and the gratitude doctor? And can we get the cure? Because I'm kind of tired of living this way. And now that I know that was the bigger issue, I'm more focused on let's get this message out here that this self-love thing is a big problem. It's the core of your addiction issues, your anxiety issues, your rage issues.
I remember when Will and I first started this, and we were going through all these different things, and every time we would delve deep into a conversation, we would look at each other like it all comes back to that.
Yeah, it all comes down to self-love.
It does. It really, really does. It's Will and I had what was it? A few weeks back, didn't we have a like the validation? Was that validation?
That was the validation,
validation one, and it's, for me at least, this is just my opinion, is like, I feel like if you have that inner worth, that inner self-worth, that inner love, that inner validation, that you don't need validation from other people. Like, sure, it's good to have, but you don't need it.
Yep.
But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because as I started to go through my as I started to pick through my EMDR files in my, because I had like, oh God, when we did my timeline, I've had like 27 life-altering traumas or something ridiculous that we had to kind of weed through. And so, we're sitting here doing the work, and I would leave the session sometimes. Sometimes I'd leave and I was a mess, and sometimes I'd leave and I'd have this like newfound epiphany of the world. But I started to really notice what would happen to me with this newfound core belief that was shifting of like, I'm a worthy human being and I'm lovable, because the way that I was able to start dealing with other relationships changed so much. Like before, I would just be so triggered by other people's behavior, right? Where I'd be like, oh my God, like they're doing this thing, and oh no, and I need to like smooth it or whatever it is, right? Because of how I've like been like trained, so to speak, through my abuse situations. And now I'm literally able to do this thing where somebody will do something, I can feel the trigger, like they can still happen a little bit, right? And I can stop and go, ooh, what's happening here? And I can sit with it, and I can figure out where I feel it in my body, and I sit with the feelings and emotions, and I sit with what I'm noticing. And then I'm able to have this total different reaction because of my own place of self-love. And I'm able to respond to this person who's projecting at me because of their own self-hatred in this way that doesn't cause that fight back, right? Like if we're triggered and we respond with the punch, they're just going to keep punching back. And I'm able to look at a person and say in my head, this is not a you problem, Kelly. This is a them problem. And it's not to blame them. It's more just to understand they don't understand how to respond to this because of their own self-love lacking issues. So you respond to them with love. Let me tell you, it confuses the shit out of you. I'm not even kidding. Like when I started responding to my father in this whole totally different way, because my father's like, we have a lot of like trigger issues, right? Love my dad, but there's issues there. And it was like he didn't know what to do. He was like, what? It's 4:12. I think I'm gonna get up from the table. Like he didn't even know what to do. He needs that fight. He needs that person to fight back with him.
Also, when people change, like when you transition, whatever, however you want to use that word, but people don't like that. If I know you and you transition and you start taking that path to the higher self, and you start doing things differently, you don't get mad at this anymore. It 9 out of 10 times it affects people that know you that well, and they're like, "Wait a minute, you're supposed to get mad at this. Like, why aren't you getting mad?" So it's like, 10 months ago, you're telling me you don't want me to get mad at this. Now that I'm not mad at it, you're like questioning it. It's like
and to speak to that point, like if you're in a codependent relationship with somebody, and that one person decides that they're going to fix something. When the other person sees that they're trying to fix something, it throws the whole fucking world off its axis, because you're like, oh shit, well, you're not reacting or responding the same way you used to. And now I don't know what to do. I don't what the fuck happened?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting dealing with people too now, like, because I have a lot of different, like I have friends and family in my world, and it's been amazing for me, not just to change my life, but the way that I'm able to respond to some of the people that I love the most with my skills to help them feel more loved, where I can see what's happening in their, it's so interesting. And you guys will probably think about this after we go away from this conversation, but you can almost see it with people when they have been triggered and their back door opens. And remember, I told you I talked about the front door, back door. it's almost like a Jekyll Hyde thing where it's like the eyes change and it's like an animal in the wild. Like I'm ready to fight. And for whatever reason in that second, that person is threatened by you. And what I came to realize is that when you're dealing with people that you love and they love you, their moment is absolute threat of this relationship. It's like, this person doesn't love me, this person doesn't want me, this person's going to abandon me. It's like all those things that we tell ourselves without even realizing what's going on. And it doesn't come from this part of our brain where we're going, well, this is completely irrational. Why are you having this conversation? It's coming from this back door, these files that are trapped in your brain that you don't have stored properly. And so you're just sort of floating around, reacting to things, not really knowing why you're doing it, but it's coming from a place of, yeah, remember the last time this thing happened to you? Oh, right. You were told you were a piece of crap, or, oh, right, you were slapped across the face, or, oh, right, you were told that you are not lovable. And that's threatening for people. It's very
threatening. We like to talk about Daniel Amen's change your brain, change your life kind of thing. Brought this whole thing up for me called the limbic jukebox, because Tim and I are both music people, and music is the first language of myself, and I like to call it the limbic jukebox, because those negative records are very easy to drop down, and they just spin, and they just go without even
it's
thinking.
Subconscious,
like negative, it's subconscious. The negative subconscious just takes over, and it's just like it plays all those hits. You're not worthy. You're this. You're that. It's crazy
all the
greatest hits. Yeah, the narrative.
All the greatest hits.
The greatest hits. Kelly, thank you so much for being a part of this, man. This has been amazing, and it's awesome to hear your story and have you bring about what complex post-traumatic stress disorder is and stuff. So usually at the end of every podcast, we ask 3 questions.
Yes.
And I'm going to let Tim ask the first question.
Sure.
Before I ask it though, I don't mean to go off on a tangent, but I do want to, you were talking about, well, you mentioned it a couple times about the memories and storing them where, unknown places, in the nervous system or wherever they end up. But I remember doing some research on PTSD, and I wrote up this thing. It's just a small little thing, and I just want to read it real quick. It's so the hippocampus is what files memory in a normal day. That's where your memories are filed, in the hippocampus. But under stress, danger, it stops filing those memories and switches to pumping cortisol, and then that cortisol stops us from feeling the pain and switches us to focus on survival. And then when all that process goes on, the memories that would normally go back up to the hippocampus during a traumatic event, they're actually hidden. So
yes.
That's where the evidence is hard to gather, so to speak.
Yep. So. And that's precisely what EMDR does, is it accesses those files that are trapped.
Right.
You reprocess them, they get stored appropriately, and then whatever core belief that is attached to those horrible traumas, you deal with those, and you actually start to recode the thoughts that you have about yourself and the experiences that you've had. It's a truly amazing experience, actually.
Wow, it's it's defragmenting software on your computer, man.
It literally is, for real. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Very cool. All right, so the first question is, do you have a favorite or least favorite word?
Oh God, I'm sure there's probably you know what my least favorite word is, and this is so funny because it's on the topic of core beliefs and who we think we are. The word boisterous was one that came up when I was a kid by my grandmother, and it made me infuriated. And for most of my adult life, it has been a trigger word for me. If somebody uses that word, I'm like, I go into the ceiling. And I now understand it's because, that was like, well, you're just ridiculous. You're a ridiculous child. You're so boisterous. So whenever I hear that word, I'm like, oh man, don't want to use that word.
Awesome. Do you have a favorite word or no? Nothing comes to mind?
I think for me right now, it's my favorite word is probably just like universe, because it's my whole thing is like that the universe shows you what you need and what you need to do. And if we listen, you'll get you'll get presented opportunities. Like I'm talking to you guys, for heaven's sakes. I wanted to figure out a way to get my story out there and to help other people. And here we are. So yeah, universe.
Yeah. The universe is an amazing thing, especially if you start to pay attention or you learn what to pay attention to and you trust it and you trust what the feedback you're getting out of it.
Trust and believe, as Shaun T would say. So there's
So I have to ask, cat, dog, or other?
So I am primarily more of a cat person. I do have a cat. I've grown up with cats. My father was terrified of dogs, so I had less exposure to them, and I think have some of my own fear of dogs at times. So I'm a cat whisperer for sure.
I love it. Yeah, we have I have a cat, and he loves Timmy. Fernando. Yeah, Fernando makes appearances on the podcast every once in a while. Even this week, he's on. This week, when the episode drops this week, he's actually on the episode.
That's awesome. I love it. Yeah, my cat's name is Belle, and she's a tuxedo cat, and she's the friendliest cat ever. People who hate cats are like, wow, I actually really like your cat. So there's that.
I just love the fact that they're not like dogs, that they're very independent, but yet they're willing to, they're actually better than humans because they'll tell you exactly what they need as long as you pay attention to them.
Totally. Couldn't agree more.
So the last question is, if there was something that you could do or that you would like to see done for mental health as a whole, what would it be?
I would say that in a nutshell, the biggest thing is that the stigma needs to end. People like myself, and others need to start talking, try to get brave to talk about what's going on, because I think when people can connect and realize that, you're not alone in the world, like that's the most important thing. Like you are not alone. That was something that I took away from this experience, is I was never alone. I think we can start actually highlighting that there needs to be more education. There needs to be more funding. There needs to be more attention, because the way that they are dealing with this issue, they are not dealing with the foundation of the problem. And the foundation of these issues is trauma, baby. And if you do not deal with the foundation, it's like building a house in quicksand. Do you really think it's going to work out? You can build it and build it and build it and build it and keep band-aiding it. But unless you knock that shit down and you make the right foundation, you can't get anywhere. So that's what I would like to see.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it.
Yeah, it all starts. We've actually talked about this a lot. Actually, we've talked about the foundation, and if you build something on a bad foundation, it's not going to stand no matter what. And you can put 1 floor, 2 floors, you can put 10 floors, you can build a glass ceiling that's just going to come crashing down on everything.
Will, I feel like you've said like a house on quicksand before too. It's like that was like right up our alley.
Yeah, that was like perfect. This actually may turn into a 2-parter. We've been talking for quite a while, which is okay. And I gotta ask, would you be willing to come back at some point?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Great.
Awesome.
Yeah. You know what I want to do, Will? I want to send her just. I think we were talking before we were actually recording for the episode, and she was talking about going through stuff and like how it, like the trash bit, like your trash on the floor, the universe dropped it.
Yep.
Yeah. And it reminded me of that thing that we came up with about going through things and excavating the wreckage.
Oh, yeah, excavating the wreckage. Yeah, we talk about excavating the wrecks a lot. There was a book that I came across in 2020. I came across. It came out, I think, in 2019, called Reboot. And Jerry Kalana is like one of the guys that was involved in like Tech Valley in California. He was like a big investor and stuff, but he learned, and he's a Buddhist and stuff, and he learned that you have to go back and excavate the wrecks of your life. So Tim and I have kind of come up with this whole archaeology dig thing where you gotta dig through all the shit, man, to find all the gold, because we don't find gold without panning tons of dirt out of it. So
100% agree. Couldn't agree more. Yep. You gotta go find those pieces of garbage, man, and put them where they belong.
Awesome. Kelly, thank you so much for being here. It was amazing to speak to you. You're a beautiful soul, and we're gonna help spread the word, and we can team up and do some stuff too, man. You know, you got a friend on the East Coast here in the States.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story and telling us, you know, and telling everybody about CPTSD and just sharing all your circumstances. I think I know it's hard for a lot of people, and you know, not a lot of people like to have these conversations, but by having them, I feel like that's a step forward in the, you know, decreasing the stigma. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Yeah, it does. And being vulnerable creates connection. And I think in the world right now, when we are dealing with COVID and there's so much uncertainty and so much change and people are really scared, I think it's so important to let people in the world know, like, you are not alone. And by sharing your story, you don't know who you're going to help and what can come from it. So let's keep connecting the dots and get stories out there and help our people, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So until next week, be well.
Be safe.
Be above.